The conceptual framework provides structure, logic, and clarity to your research design. It is through the conceptual framework that we visually and narratively connect the variables in your study, showing how they interact and influence one another. Let us now define what a conceptual framework is, and more importantly, why it is such a vital element of your research. It is a visual and narrative explanation of how the key variables in your study are related. In its simplest form, the conceptual framework is a map. It shows how the different parts of your study, especially your key variables, are linked together. The visual component refers to the diagram or the flow chart, and the narrative is the explanation that you write to describe the relationship. For example, if your study is about the relationship between knowledge of infection control and compliance, the framework will visually depict these variables and show the direction of influence, usually with arrows. Then you will explain that increased knowledge is expected to lead to higher compliance based on previous studies or theoretical assumptions. Your conceptual framework is based on the theory used, the literature review, and your own synthesis. A strong framework is anchored. It must come from somewhere. That somewhere can be a nursing theory, existing research studies you reviewed, or a conceptual synthesis that you, as the researcher, developed. For instance, if you reviewed literature and consistently found that knowledge influences compliance, then you are building your framework based on empirical evidence. Alternatively, if your theory is drawn from Florence Nightingale's environmental theory or Pander's health promotion model, you should incorporate the theoretical assumption into how you view the relationship of your variables. It also helps map out your study's focus and guide your data collection and analysis. Think of the framework as your compass. It sets your direction, narrows your focus, and ensures that your data collection is purposeful. You only collect data on the variables in your framework. Likewise, it will later guide how you analyze and interpret results. If your framework shows that knowledge affects compliance, your tools and statistical tests must be geared toward proving or disproving that relationship. Without a framework, your study might lack coherence. Having defined what a conceptual framework is, let us now examine its purpose, why it is important, and what it helps you achieve as a researcher. It clarifies what variables you will study and how they interact. This is perhaps its most immediate function. Your conceptual framework lays out exactly what you are studying: your independent variable, your dependent variable, and possibly moderators or mediators. It also clarifies how these variables are expected to influence each other. For example, in a cause-effect relationship, it illustrates which variable is the cause, which we usually call the independent variable, and which is the effect or the dependent variable. This clarity is essential not just for you, but also for your readers during your paper presentation. It helps organize your thinking and ensures logical flow. Oftentimes, researchers, especially student researchers, dive into writing without a clear logical structure. The conceptual framework forces you to stop and think critically. Are my statement of the problems aligned with my hypothesis? Are my variables measurable? Is there a logical direction from cause to effect? Constructing the framework will answer these questions and prevent confusion later on. The conceptual framework also communicates to readers what the study will examine and why it matters. The framework tells your audience what your study is really about. It is the section that says, here is what we are investigating, and here's how these elements are connected based on prior knowledge or theory. For readers, it serves as a snapshot, a quick view of the scope, direction, and rationale of your research. Now, let us break down the components that make up a conceptual framework. The independent variable, or the IV, is the predictor variable and is the presumed cause or influence in your study. It is the variable that you, as the researcher, believe will also affect something else. For example, in a study about academic stress and academic performance, the stress level is your IV because you hypothesize that it affects their academic performance. This is sometimes referred to as the manipulated, or as what I have said, the predictor variable. Although in non-experimental designs, you do not manipulate, but rather observe naturally occurring differences. The dependent variable is the outcome. The DV is the presumed effect. It is what you are measuring to see if it changes due to the independent variable. In your stress performance example, academic performance is the DV. Your goal is to determine if changes in academic stress levels lead to changes in academic performance. This variable should be measurable and clearly defined in your SOP and in your study tools. Besides the independent and the dependent variables, some studies may include additional types of variables that further explain or influence the relationship. Let us explore what are those. We have the mediator variable. This variable explains how the independent variable affects the dependent variable. As the mediator, it provides a bridge. It explains why or how the independent variable influences the dependent variable. Suppose you are studying how training affects performance. You might find that training improves confidence and confidence improves performance. In that case, confidence acts as a mediator between training and performance. Including a mediator in your framework adds depth to your explanation. The moderator variable affects the strength or the direction of the relationship. A moderator is like a dimmer switch. It changes the intensity or direction of the independent variable and its relationship to the dependent variable. For instance, if you are studying how online learning affects test scores, internet access could be a moderator. For students with stable internet, the effect might be positive. For those without a stable internet connection, it could be negligible or even negative. Moderators help you explore for whom or under what conditions the independent variable has an effect. The control variables are variables you acknowledge but keep constant to reduce their influence on the outcome. For example, if age or gender could affect your dependent variable, but they are not part of your hypothesis, you might statistically or methodologically control them. These variables are part of your design to ensure that your results are more valid. These variables should be clearly defined in your SOP and hypothesis. Every variable in your framework must appear in your statement of the problem and your hypothesis. This ensures consistency and helps you see that your study is well thought and logically constructed. Let us now discuss the structure of a conceptual framework. It can take both visual and narrative forms. First, let's start with the visual component. The visual form includes a diagram or flowchart and often takes the form of boxes and arrows. Each variable is placed in a box and arrows are used to show the direction of influence or association. For instance, from independent variable to dependent variable or through a mediator. This simple diagram helps clarify complex relationships and makes your study easier to understand at a glance. Arrows are used to indicate the cause-effect, association, or relationship. Your arrows should be meaningful. Use solid arrows for direct relationships, dashed arrows for indirect relationships, or double-headed arrows if you are showing correlation rather than causation. Make sure that arrows flow logically from cause to effect. Label each box with the exact term used in your SOP or hypothesis. Avoid vague labels like Factor 1 or Element A. Clarity ensures that your readers do not get lost trying to match your diagram with your paper. While the diagram is important, your reader, particularly your panel, will also look for a written explanation of how the variables are connected. Let us now talk about the narrative structure. Include a written explanation of how variables relate based on theory or prior studies. Your narrative should tell a story, backed by logic, theory, or research evidence. This section should explain why you expect the independent variable to affect the dependent variable. Cite theories or studies that support this. For example, you can write, based on Pender's health promotion model, knowledge about infection control influences an individual's motivation to comply with infection control practices. This connects your framework to existing knowledge and makes your assumptions credible. To help you visualize everything we have discussed so far, let us look at an example of a basic conceptual framework and how it was applied. In this example, the independent variable is knowledge of infection control, while the dependent variable is compliance with infection control practices. This is a straightforward IV to DV relationship. Later, you can add more complexity with moderators or mediators if necessary. Here is how that example can be translated into a visual framework. As you can see, the diagram is simple but clear. There is a box labeled Knowledge of Infection Control on the left, with an arrow pointing to another box in the right labeled Compliance with Infection Control Practices. This diagram aligns with the SOP and hypothesis, visually reinforcing the logic of your study. Once you have created your framework, you will need to write it up formally. Here is how to do that. Start with a brief introduction linking your study to a theory or literature review. Then describe each variable in detail. Define them conceptually and operationally. Next, explain how these variables relate. Use transitions such as affects, leads to, or explained by to signal direction and influence. Finally, support your assumptions with citations from previous studies or established theories. This adds credibility and shows that your framework is evidence-based. Now, let us talk about alignment. This is a key concept that ensures your research is coherent and complete. Your conceptual framework must match three things: your SOP, your hypothesis, and your data collection tool. Every variable in your diagram should appear in your SOP. If you claim a relationship between knowledge and compliance, your hypothesis should reflect that, and your questionnaire should have items that measure both. To make it simpler, go through this checklist before finalizing your framework. Are all variables in the SOP? Are they tested in the hypothesis? Are they measurable in the data collection tool? If yes, your framework is aligned and defensible. If not, revise until it is. Lastly, let's go over the common mistakes to avoid when designing your framework. First mistake is creating a diagram without explanation. Always accompany your diagram with a written narrative. Avoid including variables not used in the study. Stick only to what you will actually measure. Avoid a poor visual layout. Make sure your diagram is clean, arrows are clear, and labels are legible. Avoid inconsistency. If something is in your framework, it must be in your SOP and hypothesis. Final tip: always review your framework with your advisor. Their guidance can help you catch gaps and inconsistencies early. Before we end, let me give you the 3 key takeaways from our discussion on the conceptual framework. First, your framework shows variable relationships. It provides a visual and narration on the illustration of how your independent, dependent, and other variables are connected. This helps readers immediately understand the logic behind your study. Second, it guides your research direction. The framework acts as a blueprint. It keeps your study focused, informs your data collection, and ensures that every element from your SOP to your hypothesis works together cohesively. And third, it ensures consistency and clarity. A well-crafted framework aligns with your research questions and tools. It prevents confusion, supports your study's validity, and strengthens the overall quality of your proposal.